Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Hack Attack.
Oh yeah, very nice, Adam. Very nice.
It's been a little while since we've hacked anything together, Steven.
Yeah, it has. It's sad. I'm sad it's been so long, Adam.
I've missed hacking things with you.
Yep, it's true.
So, if you are tuning in to Yawn Hack Attack for the very first time, feels like the very first time, this is a show in which Stephen Lumpkin and I hang out and talk game design. We were originally just going to call the show Stephen and Adam Talk Bullshit About Game Design, but Hack Attack sounds better, I think, because it rhymes.
You know. It's got that rhyme, yep.
Yeah, so ye old Hack Attack. Today, we're going to be looking at taking a system from one game that is cool and attaching it to another game so that we can use them together.
Yes.
Which is a dangerous endeavor because sometimes it can turn out very badly. Because game designs are complicated and sometimes systems are intrinsically linked to all the rest of the game. For example, like if you decided you wanted to play like a White Wolf game, but you know what? Forget those big piles of D10s. Let's use a D20 with like an ascending level modifier. You would have to restructure the entire game. So, you know, mechanics, I think, in role-playing games can be ported from one system to another, but you got to be careful that they're not reliant on any other technology inside the game.
Yep. Totes.
So before we get to all that, though, you know, we've been using this as a platform primarily to hack away at 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons for the sake of making it feel a little more West Marchian.
Yep.
And right now, the thing that's sort of undergoing playtesting, the thing that we're doing is we've modified the inspiration system in 5th edition. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Do you want to talk about how that's going so far? Because you've playtested it. What, do you know how many sessions you've been using the new one?
We played with it in 4 sessions.
Yeah, okay.
So like the next one, when we do it on Saturday, then that'll be like the 5th one, and then I think I'll be ready to make some tweaks to it. Because I'm starting to see the areas where like it causes challenges for people, and for like the distribution of inspiration or of advantage. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's time to maybe make a tweak or two and see what happens next. So, like, I guess what's really going on here, Adam, is that, like, I have a dream of what the West Marches could be. I don't really know what it is.
Stephen, I feel like the kinds of dreams you have about the West Marches, we all call nightmares, because
yes,
there's a word.
Good.
There's a word for that in English.
You know, it's actually a really funny point because, like, I think that's totally accurate, and I think it's a really important part of fantasy for me, that fantasy be sort of terrifying in a way that's hard to nail down exactly.
Yeah.
You know, like, I feel like when you go out into the world, it can't just be like, you know, you meet a monster and it works just like everything else in the world. It has to be that this creature you've encountered is entirely alien to what our world is like. I don't know.
There's a degree of philosophical like otherness that I think disappears over time with the tropes of like imagine you're playing Dungeons and Dragons with Gary Gygax and it's 1977 and Gary, your friend, because you're friends with Gary Gygax, is like, all right, so your character is in a dungeon, a strange and unfamiliar place, and you see, and he describes to you like a beholder, you know, like a floating eyeball creature with eye stalks on it and stuff, and you're like, what the living hell is that? What have you what nightmare have you described to me? But we're all a little bit jaded now, right? Because who among us does not know what a dungeon is or what a rust monster looks like, you know?
Yeah. Like, there's an interesting comment in chat from Nemesis saying, Stephen won't rest until West marches as a peasant misery simulator like The Witcher. And actually, the world of The Witcher, while I find it a fairly compelling world, is like the opposite of the world I'm trying to build with the West Marches. Because the world of The Witcher is a world where the fantastical elements are very much a part of like the ecosystem of the world, and they're very normal, sort of incorporated thing. And what I'm
Yeah.
going for is a world where there is the human civilization safe world, where like for whatever reason humans have carved out this space, and then between those spaces there's this other stuff that's entirely alien and different and weird. And when you go out there, like, you get strange curses that just afflict you, and you meet gods walking the landscape, and you know,
I think that the aesthetic of The Witcher, because it's also like sort of fairy tale inspired, kind of fits. But there's no fairy tale where it's like Hansel and Gretel go out into the woods and they run across a witch, and they know that the witch is killed by an application of potassium sulfide using like it's like there's a science to monsters in that universe. But you know, I think it's interesting because the aesthetic is much the same. It's the like grungy peasants, thatch roof cottage, out in the wilderness kind of deal. But the consequences are different. And so, you know, I think that's a thing that we've run into sort of time and time again, talking about the West Marches mechanically as a game, because we're using D&D, and D&D feels more like The Witcher than like a fairy tale in a lot of ways.
Yep, definitely.
So the inspiration rules, particularly in Dungeons & Dragons, are supposed to, and I say supposed to, the big fucking sarcastic eye-rolling quotation mark, because what they're supposed to do and what they actually do, I think, are not in alignment. But they're supposed to reward players for role-playing, basically. Like, it's a fiat reward. Here you go, you know, role plays. But what we've tried to do to hack them is to encourage not just role playing, but a specific kind of filling in of characters' story, right? Of saying like flashbacks, inner monologues, and then interrogating the character, like having the players ask the character questions to learn more about that stuff. And do you think so far, like just based on that goal, that design goal of like get players to talk about their characters more, do you think it's working so far?
100% yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think we've seen some really cool moments that I don't think we would have seen if we didn't explicitly call out inspiration into this other portion of the game. Like when it was acting normally, it was like people would do certain things in play that were really in line with how they saw their character. Yeah. But it was never like, okay, we've taken a step back and now we're sort of watching a movie about anything you want to explore with your character. And this is a different and interesting way of seeing more stuff about the characters in the West Marches.
Right, and in a way we've included not only, the hack is not only a change to the reward mechanism, but the reward mechanism is there to introduce scene framing into D&D. Yep. Which I think is ultimately the design goal isn't like make inspiration work better, it's use inspiration to lure players into describing things that wouldn't necessarily be shown on screen.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, I felt it was so strange that, you know, when we were trying to better understand inspiration as a system, like asking the designers, like, how is it supposed to work? And the response was like almost unanimously, meh, I don't know.
Yeah, you know, however you want.
However, whatever. This is how it works. Yeah, you know, it works because you get advantage. That's how it works. You get an advantage die. Yep. Right? Not like, what is it intended to do to the narrative? Like, I don't know, DM stuff.
And pacing and, all sorts of stuff like that. So, like, the interesting thing for me is that, like, pacing really has been seriously affected by this in a way that I really like, which is that, like, when the players go into a sort of a down state, we have this sort of, like, there's a real ebb and flow of sort of a shift from more mechanical stuff, whether it's, you know, rolling for discoveries or acting out in combat or, you know, using skills to try and figure out what's going on, over to like, okay, it's nighttime, it's time to rest. Now it's really very full narrative mode, and we hear more of a story, and then we're sort of shifting back and forth. In level design, there's this concept of flow where, and I think it applies to game design as well, where like, it starts off easy and then it gets hard and then it gets easy, but it's still harder than it started, but it feels really easy because it's gotten easier than your skill level has increased to account for. And then it gets too hard for you and then it like backs down again, and like it's slowly pushing upwards. I mean, it creates this sort of ebb and flow to the feeling of playing a game, and that's what really hooks people into playing games for a really long time. And I actually think that this new form of inspiration rule has created a sort of an ebb and flow to the natural pace of a session that is working really well for my tastes. What's your perspective on that, on the other side of it, Adam? You've been in most of the episodes that we've used it.
Yeah, I've had the advantage of being on screen for that stuff and actually getting to play it. And I like it. I really like it. And I'm obviously the worst person to ask because I co-invented it. But
yep.
I mean, it makes the game do the kinds of things that the games that I like to play do already. So it just gives players an incentive or an excuse to roleplay a particular kind of scene that I think that we might have been missing before, that I think ties into the original design perspective of what we're kind of going for West Marches wise.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things that, like, because it's so like irrelevant from a mechanical perspective, ultimately, like, inspiration, it's nice to have on those rolls, but because of the chaos plateau and the way that works, sometimes it just doesn't matter if you have inspiration or not. I find that I'm engaging the mechanic because I want to learn about the characters, and that's my reward as a player. The inspiration is nice, but I don't think it's gameable enough to be able to look at it from a mechanical perspective and be like, we need this much advantage or advantage in these circumstances, so we need to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, one of the weird things that I've been noticing is that, like, even though there is a predictable way of gaining advantage, like, people will spend it or save it almost completely arbitrarily.
Yeah.
It's like, we'll sort of be pushing through some content and then it'll be clear that, like, we're running out of resources and it's going to be time for a rest fairly soon. And the people with inspiration, they won't necessarily use it. They'll just be like, well, I don't really feel like I need it, or there aren't enough rolls that take place between rests to really make it worth it.
One thing that I would add to it, or maybe, like, think about asking as a GM, and if this were a rule that were, like, in the book, when someone spends inspiration, just ask them, like, why are you inspired, or what inspires you in this moment? Like, why do you have that bonus, right? Because often, if it's just a mechanic, like, I think I used it on a charisma check once, where I was like, I don't really have a very high bonus to persuade, I'm probably going to fail, so why don't I spend my inspiration just to back it up? And if you had said to me at that time, like, okay, where are you drawing inspiration from? Then I could be like, oh, actually, I'm thinking back to when this happened, or, like, I know that if we fail, this might happen, so I'm, like, extra, like, pushed in that way.
Right. So it ties the use of the ability into a narrative sort of
and if I'm
the way that you gained it.
Yeah, and if I'm a really, really good role player, I'll find a way to tie it back into the thing I was that I was inspired by originally. Yeah. But that I wouldn't make that necessarily. That's just like tie.
That's like extra points.
Yeah, exactly.
Bonus cool points.
Bonus cool points.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find weird about inspiration right now is the economy of how you get it. And, like, the one person, one person tells a story, other people ask questions, the person can answer a question and give the inspiration to one of the question askers, and then that person is the next person who has to frame a scene. Yeah. That part especially I'm finding weird, primarily because it ends up sort of looping around the table and never really coming back full circle. Yeah. And it's actually kind of... it ends up feeling like a lot to give two people inspiration every time. And also, the person who gets it from asking the first question, oftentimes they haven't used it by the time they're the one.
I definitely had that happen. But I think, I think there's a couple of ways to look at that, and we're not really going to focus a lot on inspiration, but I would say to think about, like, iteratively making an inspiration pool we can all draw from might be able to change that. I think that right now, like, it's probably pretty good as it is. I don't feel like it's giving the players an advantage or a disadvantage generally, though it's so hard to judge because the dice are so swingy in D&D that, like, one modification to the die systems doesn't really help.
It's actually, this is a funny thing because I'm feeling that way in Stars Without Number, actually, because it's a D20 plus some stats. And it feels like if I boost my, for example, projectile weapons by 1, I get an extra +1 on that D20 roll, but it still is just a 5% increase.
Spending points on combat abilities in Stars Without Number is almost universally not worth it.
Yep.
because a skill roll, a +1 on 2d6 is so much
It's
better.
huge.
Like, it's
Yep.
so much better. And having a +3 in a skill is like good luck ever failing. Like, you'll always scrape by most of the time with like at least a partial success. And so it's like, yeah, it's a bit odd in that way. Like, ideally, I think that if we were to hack attack Stars Without Number, the first thing I would do would be cut out the D20 combat and throw it away.
Nice.
And just do skill-based combat, just like Dungeon World, all the way through, and be like, 2d6 plus your combat-relevant shit. 10 plus you deal your damage. 7 to 9 you deal like your damage minus something or whatever, and that's how it goes. But I mean, we're all familiar enough with the system now that that's kind of, I think we're making do. But like you said, like, it feels very swingy in combat because, if you had been making 2d6 plus your combat modifiers rolls in a previous combat scene that we saw with Prosperg, I don't want to spoil anything. It would have gone in at least a faster way, if not a
Yes.
So.
Like, it also feels strange. Well, like, this is getting a little bit off track, but it feels strange that, like, as a warrior, combat is something I'm specialized in, but due to the nature of the swinging dice, it doesn't feel like something I can rely on.
Oh no, you totally can.
Being good at. So
I think that's a design, that's an intentional design thing, and it works in Stars because in Stars combat is supposed to be dangerous as hell, and even the most powerful warrior can get like taken out by accident.
Yeah.
But I get what you mean, right? Where you're like, I'm a warrior and I should be able to be like warrior-y, but
like it's not so much that I don't want to not get taken out. Wait, I think I had too many negatives in there. Anyway, but like I don't feel like I can reliably take out others.
Yes, yeah.
That's the part. Like if I were like a badass sniper who could basically one shot, one kill anything, within reason, basically on demand, but then also I was really squishy if someone got to me or something like that, that would feel a lot more natural. But like, I know the first time I shoot that sniper rifle, I'm gonna just whiff.
Just gonna miss. Even though the weapon is super cool, yeah, you'll probably just miss. Chances
so anyway, like, let's talk about
yes.
like,
I mean, it's a good move to the next topic, because what we're doing today involves Stars Without Number in a sort of distant way.
Yeah. So like, we're talking about taking the faction system from Stars Without Number and gluing it onto 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, wiping our hands and saying, good job, us, we're done, and never thinking about it again.
Totally, it'll be great and easy and fast. Done.
So
all we have to do is just wipe the names off of everything and put new names on them, and we're good to go, right?
Exactly, no problem.
Easy as hell.
So like, what I'm using right now...
Game design is so easy.
Yeah, I don't see why more people don't do it. What I'm doing right now is I'm using fronts in the West Marches. So, like, there are going to be some spoilers for West Marches stuff, but it's more like you're going to see behind the GM screen than I'm going to spoil what's happened in episodes. So, like, let me pull up the front system for the West Marches. Let's see, where is it?
I love that we're doing this thing where, like, now the game that I'm running for you and a game that you're running that I'm in sometimes, there's like, okay, how can I tiptoe around like, not spoiling things for Steven? Like,
right, yeah, let me see, what am I looking for? Dungeons & Dragons, West Marches, countdowns. I have a whole bunch of like text documents and Excel spreadsheets and a hexographer file for the West Marches. So, okay, what have we seen recently? Yeah, okay, so this is really obvious. So there's a countdown at Flaterhind, which I'm calling the collapse of Flaterhind. And if you remember from a couple episodes back, Grigori, Shaldrick Varani, and Lucas went to Flaterhind. They killed an alchemist who was responsible for producing the potions that were keeping the spring clean. And so, like, basically this poisonous spring is now killing the village. So the first thing that was going to happen is that Alalmos, the alchemist, gets killed. The second thing that happens, and it happened a couple weeks ago in game, is that Flaterhind ran out of potions. The third thing that happened, which happened very recently in game, and nobody knows about it yet, but it happened, so spoiler alert. The first elves of Flaterhind have fallen ill to the stream's poison. And I think just like 2 days ago in game time, We haven't heard about it yet, but we will hear about it very soon. It's common knowledge in the world of the West Marches that Bawick, the town that the group went through last time, Bawick has been attacked by the leader of the elves from Flaterhind. So like there's a couple of other steps to this as things progress forwards. And we're going to find out what's going on, and people are going to get the chance to engage with any of this however they want. And it creates a situation in the world where the players in the West Marches can choose to look at it and say, there's something going on over there. Let me go and do something with it.
Yeah.
But what I don't like a couple of things. So one, I don't like that it's all player oriented. Like there is no relationship between this countdown and any other countdown out in the world of the West Marches. Though, there could be ways to tie something like that together.
Fronts inherently in every iteration of them I've seen are discrete blobs of stuff, but there's no mechanical way, whether you're playing it. I mean, Dungeon World, we kind of try to do the campaign and the adventure fronts, but it's like a pyramid shape. But and I'm having the same thing because I'm running Apocalypse World right now, and in my like GM turns for that, I have all these fronts that are kind of moving forward, and there's places where they're obviously going to intersect. Like Jericho's hold loses their shit, and they go and attack their closest neighbor. But then how does that interact with the hold nearby, like with Mercer's hold and how Mercer's thing is going? And I have to kind of eyeball it every session and be like, okay, move this clock down, move this clock up, and like hope that they can intersect at the right time, because 12 o'clock for Mercer is 3 o'clock for Jericho, and like where do those crash into each other?
Yeah.
And like in like you said, it is very like kind of player focused, and it's about what time do you show up during the sort of click through of that clock. What snapshot do you see? Because all that really matters is what's like on screen at any given time.
So let's see. I'm going to try to write some of this stuff down just so I remember it. So problem number 1, player focused or player facing.
Yeah.
Problem number 2 is, to me, because of the nature of the West Marches and the changeover of players between sessions, countdowns as they are feel like if Grigori comes back every 2 or 3 sessions, then a countdown that he was interested in early on might advance so quickly that he never gets to see the end of it. That might just be a pacing thing, and I just need to make countdowns advance much more slowly because there's a bunch of them.
It's tough because narratively and realistically, like the amount of time people are playing and when they play can be tricky. Like the whole like having leprosy thing and like being off screen for a really long time or a really long time. It can seem like, well, why would I be doing anything but adventuring? Like I'm trying really hard to like do this thing. Why did the clock tick ahead? But I think that's you get player buy-in. Like that's a human level thing where it's like, yes, the world will continue to move forward, and you might not be able to follow A through Z of the story that you're on. We're all kind of guesting in each other's stories as we move through the world.
So like another thing that I'm hoping to get out of this is when a player who's been absent for a while comes back to the game, and this I think for me is the main point of factions for West Marches. When someone who was in a session 4 or 5 sessions ago comes back to the game, they should immediately be able to look at the game and say, like stuff is different. And what is it about the stuff that I'm seeing that's different? And right now, that's just not apparent at all. And to a certain extent, I think that's partly the way that I've set up like the random tables, and partly the way like the town of Virascali is very protected from things. But one of the things that isn't currently hooking into that perception of the way things are changing is the front system and the way that I'm currently using it at the moment. So,
well, so do you want me to kind of like do the rundown of how the faction system works and kind of where it's different?
Yeah.
Okay. So in Kevin Crawford's games, I know at least 2 of them use this. Stars Without Number being the first, Silent Legions being the second. There's a system for creating a sandbox environment in which there are powers larger than the PCs that are in conflict with each other. And I think that part is super important, right? Like, you cannot have a game that uses a faction system where the factions are all doing the same thing, because the point is that some of these factions neither know about or care about the PCs and fight with each other over control over stuff that's in the universe. Now, that interacts with the way that the PCs see the world, because if you leave a place, stuff might happen, you come back, it's different, and that is all controlled by the faction turn. The GM has rules for that stuff. It's not just the GM bullshitting and making stuff up. Like, oh, you came back to, Flaterheim, and guess what? It's on fire. Why is it on fire, Steven? I don't know, because I decided. Just cause fuck you, that's why. Because it's Grigori's birthday, that's why. So what it does is it creates a system in which you can have adversarial elements in the system fighting each other and track the assets that they control. And it interacts with the players directly because it allows you to look at specific stuff. And in Stars Without Number, it's things like facilities, spaceships, operatives, whatever. Those are all represented in the faction turn, but they can also be represented physically in the world of the game, kind of at large. So I'm gonna jump the screen over, and we're gonna take a quick look at. I got a Chrome window here. This window is going to look familiar to anybody who has attended ye old Stars Without Number Swan Song faction turn before. I'll try to keep it spoiler free for the audience and for Steven's sake, but thankfully Steven can't see the spreadsheet, so
I can see it now.
Get away from the stream. So we've got This sheet allows me to keep track of each faction in the world. And in Stars Without Number, we've got them listed by name. They have 3 stats. They have force, cunning, and wealth. They have hit points like a character. They have income they receive every faction round, which is like a month turn. They have credits, which is their total bank. They have tags to describe them and give them like special abilities. It's sort of like their class. And then here I also have their homeworld, their current goal, how much experience they have, and I've added an extra column so that I know how they relate to the characters, because this is a way for me to manage that. And so what we do in this section is this is the character sheet for each one of these things, and then on my asset tracker, I've got a list of, again, the factions, what kind of assets they own, what type of asset it is, the assets themselves have hit points, what type they are, their attack and counterattack stats. So for example, a strike fleet, which is a fleet of spaceships, uses the force of its owner, rolls versus the force of its enemy, and if it hits, it deals 2d6 damage. If it is defending and defends successfully, it counterattacks for 1d8. And then I've got some records of where they are. So what this allows me to do as a GM is to say, these are my factions, these are all of the things available to these factions, and I go through each faction in turn and decide, okay, what is their goal? How are they going to accomplish that goal? And what do they need to do to make that happen? And it's just like NPCs in a game, right? Where I'm like, okay, Mr. Titan exists, and Mr. Titan wants to kill Mr. Sicarian, but he wants it to do it in a very specific way, and what tools does he have at his disposal to do that? And he can use the Pfotenhauer Society, and he has these available, and we buy all the different faction assets, add them to the asset tracker for each one, and then I use these to carry out my little one-player game of faction versus faction and how they end up fighting. And this affects what happens in play. So if you've tuned in, I think the statute of limitations on this episode is well past because it happened a while ago, but if you've been tuning in to like 4 or 5 episodes ago of Swan Song, you know about the drama with Nika Starlight and the Prophet, and how all that stuff worked. And all of that is mechanical things. It's just like having PC fighting some NPCs on screen, but it's happening off screen. So, during the turn, I put Nika on the planet. Nika tried to make the demagogue come out of hiding. The demagogue attacked her with blackmail. It didn't work. They went back and forth for a little while, and eventually she lost all of her hit points, which removed her from the faction turn. So she got pulled out of the fiction. In the same way, the opposite is true of things in the game affecting the fiction of the faction turn. So in play, when the Warmind, again, this is old news if you've been watching for a while, but in the game, Warmind dropped a bunch of bombs on Andoni, and because the players chose not to stop that or were unable to stop it, it affected all of the assets on that planet, right? I rolled damage for all of them, and most of them got blown up, and it resulted in a change in government on Andoni from the Andonian Cultural Protectorate to the Andonian Armed Forces Remnant. So it changed the way that the faction turn continued to play. Like, if you keep watching and, like, let's say the players get really focused on going after the Syndicate, for example, if that's their quest and they keep doing syndicate goals, they keep blowing up facilities, they want to eliminate the drug trade, that will cause damage to the Madari syndicate in the back end, right? In my faction turn. So as a GM, the way that I use this is to create a world that doesn't care about the PCs. And it sounds weird because as a GM, part of your job is creating situations in which the PCs affect the world and are an important part of the world. But in a sandbox game, they can't be the most important part of the world. They're just the part of the world we're looking at right now. So
I think there's something interesting there where like it's almost like because there are other things happening in the world, my choices as a player character feel much more important because I know that like my choice not to do a thing is also important, if that makes sense. It's like in a linear story like movie style D&D game, like my choice not to go after the vampire means like what, the vampire's gonna attack me when I'm heading out of town, or like I'll get to the next town over and there'll be a vampire cult, or like everything, all of the roads lead to the vampire no matter what choice I make.
Right, yeah.
But in a sandbox game, in a game with fronts and factions, my choice not to engage is a choice with consequence. And that means that my positive choices to engage actually make a difference. So yeah, I'm
gonna be a history nerd for a second here. You want your PCs, like the PCs are not the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They're not even the Black Hand. The PCs are Gavrilo Princip, and when they assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand, it causes World War I, right? Like. Right. For them, it's just for Gavrilo over there, it was just pulling a trigger, right? It was doing a small scale action that rippled out through the entire history of the world, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what you want your PCs to be, right? You want them to have actions that can, in theory, impact large scale constructs, right? And I think that's what makes people feel like they're part of a world that reacts to them, right? When they're able to do that.
And there is some of that theoretically in the West Marches right now. Like for example, the awakening of the Serpents of Woe. Like that should be a huge thing that like all of a sudden makes a big difference in the world. But because I don't have a faction system helping me out, it's really hard to make that apparent.
Right, and
I don't have mechanical help.
Again, and we've talked about this before, and like my opinion is that if it's not in the rules, it isn't. It's not a part of the game. It's not an inherent part of the game. So yes, you're the GM. Yes, the players are players. You can make stuff up. That's the point, right? We're playing a role-playing game. But functionally, when it comes down to it, if it's not in the rules, there's no impetus to make it matter or do anything. So yeah, awakening the serpents is a big deal and will be a big deal, but you have to remember that in your head. It's not a thing that affects the game. Whereas for me, like if I were jamming West Marches with a faction turn system, I could very easily go back and say, okay, well, the players found the sleeping big bad monster. It's awake now. We know its allegiances, where it lies. I'm just going to add that as an asset. And now that monster can go after its enemies, whether those enemies are, the nearest town, which is an asset of a different faction, or whether it's like other monsters. And this way you can have that whole like evil fighting evil thing while the PCs are out there trying to get money and survive.
There's another thing that I am finding frustrating about fronts that I think factions makes a lot easier, which is that fronts are like, because they're so player facing, it's very hard to have a front that advances that the players are helped by or interested in pushing forwards. Like there's some stuff happening in the West Marches now that's kind of establishing a faction that is not opposed to the players necessarily, but instead has its own interests. Yeah. And that's harder to do with fronts. So, yeah.
Well, I think for me, like, I knowing this and knowing that stuff is happening, I can ally myself with a faction, much in the same way that, like, Prosper is doing things for the Republic of Cabral. Like, if I could find a faction that was oriented against someone that Grigori was fighting, I would pick my missions or try to encourage the players to pick missions based on what would advance that faction, right? Like if I really wanted to kill those stupid elves, I would just find, hey, who doesn't like them? How can I help you? How can we get you more assets? How can I destroy the assets of your enemies? That kind of thing. And really, when it comes down to it, too, like, fundamentally the difference between fronts and factions are that fronts are designed to highlight the players specifically, to put them in the spotlight and create adversarial encounters for them, because the point of the game, because the point of Apocalypse World is, in some degree, being a fan of your characters, right? Being a fan of the players' characters.
Yeah.
And in a sandbox-style game, we, as people playing and watching, should care about the characters, but the GM doesn't. Right? The GM's job is not to be like...
actually, the GM's job is explicitly to be impartial.
Yeah.
In a sandbox game.
In a sandbox game, yeah, your job is to portray the world as realistically as possible, in movement, with and by itself, and that's how it goes, right? And so, fronts are useful. Obviously, they're something that I thought was useful for inclusion in Dungeon World, but Dungeon World and the West Marches are very different games. From a GM perspective.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, where do we go from here? Like, we've pretty much covered sort of like the goals of what we want to achieve by incorporating factions into the West Marches. So do we need to address other parts of factions and play?
Yeah, I mean, my thought is like scope. Like, let's talk a little bit about scale and scope, right? Mm-hmm. So, like in Stars Without Number, and this is why I think that the real thing that we're going to be looking at to hack isn't going to be the faction turn from Stars Without Number. It's going to be the faction turn from Silent Legions, because the scope fits better there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the DM, but I'm pretty sure that none of the factions in the West Marches are going to own a fleet of capital starships.
No.
I'm also pretty sure the West Marches doesn't have several billion inhabitants.
Yes. Like, there is there's kind of two ways you could take a game like the West Marches. And actually, I'm finding both of them very interesting right now. Like, in a game where the West Marches is more centralized towards the middle of civilization, you could have something, not Fleet of Capital Starships-esque, but something on the fantasy scale of that, where it's like, the Viridian Empire has an army of elementals at its command, or something like that. There's one sort of perspective of looking at it that's not very West Marchy example, but the other perspective is that it's all taking place in the wilderness, and it's much, much less about soldiers and large military resources, and much more about town defenses and wild monsters coming out of the woods and stuff like that. So
yeah, I would argue that West Marches, as it stands, is probably on the very lowest end of the scale you would need to play a game that used a faction system like this, because the number of assets any given faction is going to have is likely to be lower, or assets will represent smaller things, right?
Yes.
Not a cadre of cyber ninjas, but like a single dark crusader or whatever. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that actually makes it easier for the players to intersect with it, because, when we go out and kill the shit out of the Cockatrice Knight, you can immediately look and be like, who is this character allied with? Who will possibly want revenge? How does this impact them in a significant way? So, I think there's room for this faction system to be applied. And I think that it's worth looking at, too, the reason why this... It's funny, because I think the thing that makes the faction turn accessible to a bunch of different games, where I think it's easy to pick up and put in another game, also kind of makes it a poor design. Because, here's the thing, right? I believe in design that is integrated, right? I think that systems should be, and this is why I love Burning Wheel so much, is because everything is reliant on everything else. You cannot take very much. There's only a tiny bit of things, like the very top of the totem pole, from Burning Wheel and apply it to other games, because it's also intricately connected. And in Stars Without Number, the faction turn literally is its own standalone game that has nothing to do with the mechanics of the rest of the game. right? Like, there's nothing in Stars Without Number that, as it stands,
it doesn't tie it in.
No, you don't need the two of them. Like, they could very easily have been sold as two separate games.
Yeah.
I feel like the Faction Turn is the role-playing equivalent of the board game Diplomacy.
Yeah.
More than anything. Like, you could very easily play this with multiple players. I could be like, okay, Steven, you're in control of the Republic of Cabral. Jeff, you're in control of the Fotenhauer Society, so on and so forth. Send me your orders. I'll manage the world. I'll tell you what happened every turn, and you just keep doing that, and it's functionally a standalone game.
Adam. That would be really cool.
It would be really cool. I was talking about this during a Swansong GM turn one day of just being like, we'll just get 8 people together and do a play-by-email, 1 turn a week game of like space diplomacy, because it's a more complex diplomacy. And if you haven't played diplomacy before, and this is to anybody watching this, it is one of the most important game designs I think ever in how influential it is. Like, it's so good. It's a really, really fantastic board game.
I think it could be very cool to like in King Arthur Pendragon at the end of each session, there's supposed to be a period where the knights sort of manage their manors. Yeah. So you go back home, and for the rest of the year, like, you roll to see how much income you earned, and you like build improvements and stuff like that. It could be really interesting to allow player characters, or like players who control player characters, to also control a faction that's somehow linked.
Well, yeah, and what there's some general advice for in Stars Without Number, like, once the characters have reached a level where they have enough money and power to create a small faction. So, like, there could be a Swan Song faction in the faction turn, in which case it would work kind of like that. But yeah, there's no intrinsic connection mechanically. Like, nothing else in the game is measured in force, cunning, or wealth. Hit points are on a different scale. Faction credits are very loosely attached to the amount of money. Like, in the game, it says a faction credit might be kind of maybe worth 100,000 credits, give or take, but probably not. It also represents a bunch of other shit.
Yep.
The tags, the XP, all that stuff, they have similar names, but they're not related except narratively to what's going on the player level, which thankfully, for what we're trying to do today, makes it really easy to just be like, chop, let's take this. Yeah, we're going to put it in another system. Yep. Yeah. So, looking at this in the very long term, if my like thought would be to hack this eventually in a way that ties mechanically into the game you're playing better. But it's pretty easy to just pick it up and plop it down on another system to allow you to do some of the same stuff.
Sure. All right, good. So, where do we start?
Well, I think that the first place to look is at existing material, right? If you're making a hack of something that already exists, you want to look at what you have in front of you and what you can keep and what you can throw away. Right?
Yeah.
So, we still got a little time before we wanted to go into the like real nitty gritty, but let's go through the aspects of a faction. I'm going to switch us back to our other window so we have something to refer to.
Cool.
And let's talk about what a faction is and how those are sort of measured. So, a faction is made up primarily of its stats, and in Stars Without Number there are 3 of them. The stats affect a couple of things. They affect how much money you get every turn based on like your wealth and some other stuff. They affect how you damage or protect yourself from damage with other factions. And they go to measuring general overall size. And they're also what you spend experience on. So in Stars Without Number, the factions have force, cunning, and wealth. Now, I don't know what Kevin's design reasoning behind having only 3 is. Maybe we would want more, maybe not. But do you think generally, Steven, your factions in a West Marches environment, like, do you think force, cunning, and wealth apply? Like, these are political entities more than like creatures.
So like, I think at a baseline, it's a really good place to start and just say like, yeah, okay, like their military impact, their philosophical impact, which is like their cunning, and then like how much they impact industry and flow of resources. Like, that's potentially a valuable place to start.
Yeah, as a compare and contrast, like Halfwing just said in chat, muscle, sorcery, and influence are how they do it in Silent Legions.
I mean, it would be like, muscle, influence, and then
magic. Like,
yeah,
I mean, I
magic
guess
could be a power.
how do factions impact each other in the West Marches? Like, what are their primary tools for getting their like one up on each other, right? They can use military force, so like maybe they have, you know, a troop of ogres or some manticores or a clan of lizardmen or whatever, and they want to use those to attack somebody. Like, that's an obvious one, right? Force,
that's definitely a thing that happens.
Whatever,
for sure.
military.
I think like a second big way that they can attack each other is, it's not really magic, because magic in the terms of like flinging a fireball would almost fall under force.
Well, that's definitely, force.
But like there's some sort of like it would almost, like, you'd call it weird.
Yeah, I feel like they're in this situation, weirdness is fully a thing, because like an army, like a duke's army, might contain archers, peasant foot soldiers, and some knights, right? And the duke's army has a weirdness of 0. But if the Duke wanted to recruit like a witch, he'd have to increase his weirdness to 1, and then we could get like a local hedge witch to come and join his forces.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then like, you know, if you use a weird asset to attack a military asset, then like, who knows what results? Yeah. Like maybe that's where like grave golems come from or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that there's a little bit of sort of blurring the lines in terms of like, because in the way that the turn works, a force asset attacks the force of another character, but you can defend with anything you want. Mm-hmm. So if the Fotenhauer Society attacks Onitza Libre with a force asset, like they've got soldiers on the planet, Onitza Libre can choose to defend with like an agricultural combine, in which case it's just Fotenhauer attacks Onitza Libre, because you always attack the faction. It's like in Magic the Gathering, right? I'm going to attack you. You pick who you defend with. And so they defend, and instead what happens is that the agricultural combine gets attacked and blown up or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so like that's definitely another one. So like, you know, muscle and then weird, and then I don't know if wealth is the right angle,
because I mean, everybody,
maybe it should be.
I don't know, like we haven't run into, in my experience in the West Marches, anybody with much money, like even factions. Like it feels like influence might be better, like social influence instead of fiscal influence.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
Because
like cultural cash, basically.
Yeah, you're not throwing around buckets of money on their own, but you might be able to like, you know, convince someone. And this is where you could have like a cult might own, the cult of the Flensworm might have like, yes, some fanatics, but it also has like a like a mouth of the worm, and that thing goes into villages and undermines the leadership there by getting people over onto its side.
Yep. So muscle, weird, and maybe influence.
Influence, muscle, weird, and leverage.
And then of course, you know, gold makes sense as like the wealth, or not wealth, but
yeah. I mean,
credits?
I think we can stick with hit points as is, because hit points are hit points.
Yep.
And then income, and then fact creds. Yeah, you'd want to call it like, I would almost call this wealth, like how many wealth points you have, because if you call it gold, it becomes like, you know, how much gold is a gold, right?
Yeah, definitely.
This way,
like,
too,
wealth could be gems, wealth could be
and this is
star metal, wealth could be
right. And this is why I think that separating wealth from a stat and making it about how much capital you have in terms of just money, that way you're using your money to power your weird or, you know, whatever, your influence.
And like, like wealth doesn't necessarily need to be money either. It can literally be, this is some arcane resource that you can funnel wherever.
Yeah, I mean, it comes from, like, because you'll have assets that don't, like, this isn't all just about attacking, right? You can have assets like harvesters and stars of the number that generate more money than you would normally get in a turn. And so in West Marches, this would be like a village that has farms, or a village that has a mine nearby, or a logging camp, or whatever. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about tags then, because tags, and the list that I've got up on the screen right now, these are just the tags from Stars Without Number. They're not meant to be exhaustive. You can add your own. So I think in this case, you'd want to go through what was available to you and pick and choose from them and apply them. Like, I would almost leave tags until later, because they affect existing mechanisms, right? You kind of want to build around them, and then these are how you bend the rules or how you cheat.
Yeah.
But the core mechanics are much the same. Like, they mostly allow rerolls. They give you advantage as a faction on certain turns. They allow you to create stealth assets. You get extra credits during certain stages, and these are easy. Tags are super easy to come up with.
Yep.
You know, because it's like, you know, if your faction is the servants of a dark god, then cultists, right? That's your tag.
Yep. I mean, local government instead of planetary government. Theocratic makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Psychic Academy, easy to turn that into Sorceress Academy.
Yeah.
You know.
And I mean, Psychic Academy is like a built-in thing in the world. You could very easily replace these with proper nouns, like place of power or whatever. Sacred lineage, powerful bloodline. You know, immortal founders. Like, there's all kinds of bullshit that you can use. Like, pretty much, it's like the way that I do like tags in a lot of fiction is I have someone, I'm like, just describe this thing to me. So like, okay, cool, you found a magic sword, describe it. And the way that people describe it, you just write it down, and like, those are the tags, and you just mechanize them, right? So you could write a 2-sentence or 1-sentence description of each faction, and then see where the tags come from that. Cool. So tags, again, a thing that I would suggest leaving till later. Goals, kind of the same jam. Like, again, a non-exhaustive list of things that the factions might want. Usually they're destroy a certain type of asset, get a certain amount of money, destroy a foe completely, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so like, there's a weird thing here, and it plays weirdly with Dungeons and Dragons in general, which is like, the idea of what a manticore wants, or the idea of what goblins want.
I think I saw that movie, What a Manticore Wants.
Yeah.
Michael Keaton was in it, I think.
Yeah. I think like the critical sort of perspective to take is that a manticore or the goblins probably are not a faction.
No, totally.
They probably are an asset that are used by some other faction, and maybe the factions in a game like West Marches are almost like aligned, and it's like, who's the lawful good, who's the chaotic neutral faction, or maybe like one thing that Adam and I tossed out on the pre-stream was the idea that like civilization is a strong faction influence, and then the wilds are another strong faction influence, and so like the wilds has a manticore asset, the wilds have a goblin asset. And then like these things are acting against civilization and vice versa. I would
definitely tack on top of goal, and I would maybe make them react to each other in some way, but I would add for particular factions an alignment column, and maybe your alignment gives you choices of goals or affects goals in some way. But you know, for a really good example of this in fiction, and one that Dungeons and Dragons just straight up stole from, 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, it's this old fantasy novel, explicitly says that in the world there are 3 alignments, or 3 ways you can be aligned. You could be for the forces of law, you can be for the forces of chaos, or you can be neutral. And it really like very much creates a system where, you know, if you look at a faction, you could say like the city, the nearby city or whatever, they might be aligned with law. And you know that they're immediately going to be philosophically adversarial with the agents of chaos. And like you said, this might be law and chaos. This might be civilization and wilderness. It's really up to you to determine where the lines are drawn between factions and how they want to get.
So like, I think that like civilization and wilderness are 2 really strong factions that could just be like the bedrock of any West Marches game. But then you could have other things like the gods. Each god could be a faction. Like there are certain very powerful, intelligent creatures out in the wild.
Like dragons. Yeah, like a dragon, like an elder worm or whatever. Probably its own faction. But and this is the thing is you can move assets to faction to become their own faction as they get more powerful or whatever. Like if we go on a quest for like a lower level monster, but that's still like a powerful monster, and we get them like a crazy powerful artifact and they ascend, then they might become a faction when previously they served a particular god, but now they're their own jam. And the god might be sending its assets after that creature.
I think that one of the weird assets that a faction can purchase is some form of ascension.
Yeah, totally.
So, like, I've purchased this weird asset that turns me into, like, the next step of demigodhood.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that could be like buying an asset, that could be spending XP. Like once they accumulate enough XP, they can choose one of their assets, ascend it to its own faction. But what's funny about that is then it invariably either becomes an allied faction or it might turn against them, right? It might be like, the Flinsworm might need a demigod to serve it, but that demigod might be, formerly it's High Cleric, it's now the godlike servant of the Flinsworm, but eventually it's like, you know what? Maybe I'm going to kill the Flinsworm and steal its power for my own. So I'm going to use my new cult to do that.
Someone was asking in chat just right now, Shadowriku90 says, was Mira a faction? Like, that would be a good sort of like focal point for a faction, is like all of the like plague cult that was going on far to the south. They would definitely have been like the sort of group that would have been trying to like reach out and secure new assets and like use assets in interesting ways to further their own power. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so a thing worth looking at. And yeah, I would make it a product of XP rather than of like buying a particular asset.
Yep, that makes sense. I mean, it might be like I'm talking about ascension in the in-universe idea of like creatures becoming demigods or something like that. So it'd be like a faction might buy an asset and apply it to another asset or something like that.
Like like stealth. So in this system, you buy stealth with credits, and instead of getting a new asset, you sink an existing asset into a stealth state, and no one can find it anymore.
Yeah,
you don't come away with anything, but it does change the core rules for that asset.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
and then just determining what you're spending that XP on, that building that table would be the next thing. Now the real work, and this is why we want to set aside like a full hour for it, is looking at what kinds of assets are available to the factions once we've decided how the factions are set up.
Yeah. Like, should we talk really quick before we take our break about faction actions?
Yeah,
or is that deep enough? We want to do that.
Let's save it because we've only got a couple minutes. Let's take the break now, and when we come back, we'll talk about the kinds of things that factions can do before we talk about the tools they use to do them.
Yeah,
sounds good. Okay,
sounds good.
Cool. So stick around, everybody. We're just gonna go for a quick break, and we will put up a timer. Be back in about 5 minutes. See you soon.